The first shot came without a declaration of war. For 91 seconds, every hollow screen on the Galactic Council's bastion ring replayed the same footage. A Vakari strike cruiser, dark as a clenched fist, sliding over the clouds of Meridian 7 and releasing a single tactical lance into the civilian arcologies below. The towers folded like paper. The oceans boiled into white sheets of steam, and in the chamber above the ring, Legate Sarath Vane, senior diplomat of the Vakari Dominion, watched it happen with his luminous purple hands folded calmly on the rail before him, as if he were admiring fireworks. 4.3 million humans died in those 91 seconds. Children at school, nurses on the night rotation, grandparents who had signed the original Earth Sovereignty Compact and still kept the printed copy above their bed. The attack was not an accident. It was a sentence, and the Vakari had just finished saying it out loud. 12 minutes before the lance fell, Captain Amos Drayle of the Terran Border Service had transmitted the warning. He had followed protocol down to the second. 3 pings on the narrowband, 1 on the open diplomatic channel, 1 on the Emergency Council uplink, stamped with every codex the old treaties required. He had spoken the line every human officer is trained to speak when a foreign hull crosses into Terran-declared space. "You are entering a forbidden volume. Reverse course. Acknowledge. This is not a request." The order had been spelled out in plain basic, the universal language of the Council, in the dialect the Vakari use in their own courts, and in slow, careful English for the dairies of history. Captain Drayle had been polite. Captain Drayle had been precise. Captain Drayle had been ignored. The Dominion's fleet of 312 warships had been holding formation beyond the boundary for 19 days, pretending to be on survey maneuvers. Their forward scouts had already mapped the outer orbitals. Their intelligence droids had already bribed 2 mining colonies for fuel routing charts. Their holopamphlets, distributed across the Bastion Ring's lower decks for months, had already described humanity as a regional curiosity, a young species still wet from its own oceans, useful at best as labor and decorative at worst as pets. Then the Dominion had crossed the line. Then the humans had warned them. And then, because the Dominion believed that a species which sends a polite warning is a species which will not strike, the Armada had pushed forward, lance hot, shields bright, expecting terror. They had not received terror. They had received silence. On Earth, deep beneath the basalt of the Canadian Shield, in a chamber older than the United Nations, older than the space program, older than the first radio broadcast, the Emergency Council convened. 12 figures, 2 chairs empty for the first time in the chamber's recorded history. The President of the Republic spoke first, and their voice was not loud. It never gets loud. That is the point of the doctrine. "Confirm the Meridian violation." "Confirmed," replied Admiral Yara Okonkwo Voss, commander of the 9th Carrier Group, who had been awakened in a hotel corridor in Helsinki 40 minutes earlier and had not yet removed her flight suit. "Lethal strike. Civilian target. Unprovoked. Confirm the warning sequence." "Confirmed," said the foreign minister. 3 narrowband, 1 diplomatic, 1 council uplink. Recognition codes valid, within tolerance. "Confirm the casualties." 4.3 million, plus the colony's orbital population, plus the 11 ships of the Outer Salvage Guild who were docked at the time. The Minister of Census set down the tablet. The number did not need to be repeated. There was a long pause. The chamber lights dimmed slightly, a feature of the building's old engineering, the way a cathedral automatically dims before a prayer. "Summon the doctrine," the President said. 240 meters below the chamber, past biometric gates sealed with the marrow keys of 6 living families each, a door opened onto a room that did not appear on any modern blueprint. It was a hangar carved from Precambrian stone, lit with lamps that had been burning on trickle current since before the first human left the atmosphere. In its center sat a single black chair, and behind the chair sat a single bank of switches covered by a glass panel. Each switch was labeled in an alphabet that combined Latin and the old machine code. The president did not enter the room herself. She never did. A warden, whose name did not appear in any public record, pressed the switches in a sequence that took 11 minutes and 42 seconds. Above the chamber, in the basalt, the lights did not change. On Earth, in the ordinary world, nothing visible happened. No sirens, no broadcasts. The morning commute continued. Children continued to ride school buses beneath a sky that still looked entirely innocent. In orbit, however, 7 ghost carriers began to move. Their names were not listed in the public registry of the Terran Navy. Their hulls were not painted in the standard neutral gray. They were matte black, unreflective, their seams invisible to passive scan, their drive signatures tuned to mimic background radiation. They had been built in the Mars shipyards during the long silence, when humanity, between its 2 great crashes, had decided never again to be caught sleeping. For 14 years they had drifted in high graveyard orbits, fully crewed, fully supplied, their crews living in shifts calibrated so that no single watch would ever know the full picture. They were called, in the doctrine's quiet language, the Cracked Mirror Group. Their mission was to be the last thing any enemy ever saw. Alongside them, 3 rail platforms older than the carrier hulls swung on their gimbals and oriented toward a single bearing. They carried weapons that did not yet exist in the public weapons registry. Their bore was a single city block across. Their first firing solution had been computed for Meridian 7. Their second had already been computed for the Vakari flagship. The Galactic Council, watching from its gilded upper ring, had believed for 3 generations that humanity was a minor species. That assessment had been authored jointly by the Vakari and the Sion Combine, then quietly endorsed by 16 other blocks who preferred to let the bullies do the talking. The Council's own dossier on Earth described human population as regional, fractious, technologically derivative. The Council's own astronomers had downgraded Earth's strategic index 3 times in the past decade. The Council's own cultural attachés had recently circulated a memo listing human music, human literature, and human cinema as promising but provincial. The Council had been told this by the Vakari because the Vakari liked being the ones telling the Council things. The Council had told it to itself because the Council always prefers the version of the galaxy that lets it sleep well. And humanity had never corrected the record. Humanity had, in fact, spent 97 years quietly funding the record's perpetuation. Every leaked survey, every embarrassed ambassador, every oops moment at the trade talks had been weighed and, where useful, encouraged. The doctrine called this management of perception under glass. Then Meridian 7 burned, and under glass shattered. The Vakari legate, Sarath Vane, was not surprised by the human warning. He had read it. He had waved it off with one of his luminous hands, telling a junior attaché that the warning was atmospheric, as is their species. He had been amused when the human envoy on the floor of the Council had stood and demanded an apology in plain English, with no rhetorical flourishes, and then, when the apology did not come, had placed a small black tablet on the central rostrum and said, "This is the timestamp at which you were told." The envoy had been a slim woman in a dark uniform, her hair in a tight roll. her face unreadable. She had not raised her voice. She had said, "You will not cross this meridian again without consequence. The consequence will not be a request. The consequence will not be a negotiation. We are informing you because we are required to, and because we still, foolishly, believe that being informed matters." The legate had laughed, or produced the Vakari equivalent, a low vibration in the chamber's acoustic panels. He had replied, in basic thickened with formality, that the Dominion did not take instruction from atmospheric mammals. He had said it for the cameras. He had said it because he believed it was true. He had said it 19 minutes before his Armada fired on Meridian 7. The Dominion's fleet moved deeper into Terran space as the hours progressed, expecting each forward sensor ping to reveal panic. They received, instead, the steady hum of a civilization that had been preparing for this morning for longer than the Dominion had been a galactic power. Commercial lanes rerouted themselves without announcement. Civilian shipping formed disciplined evacuation arcs that took them, by design, past the dark orbits of the ghost carriers, giving the Armada a final opportunity to notice a pattern it could not, by design, read. The Dominion's tacticians noticed only absence. No fleet. No broadcast panic. No scramble of small patrol craft. Some of them began to suspect a trap. The more senior officers discounted the suspicion. They had seen humanity under pressure before. They had seen humanity negotiate, apologize, fund, sign. They had never, in their entire strategic memory, seen humanity strike first. Then, on the third hour, a single human destroyer lit up on the lattice. It was a small ship, painted standard neutral gray, hull number visible to every passive sensor in the system. It had not been ordered there. It was there because its captain, who happened to be at the wrong end of a refueling rotation, had requested permission to intercept, and Admiral Okonkwo Voss had granted it without comment. The destroyer broadcast a final public warning on every band, in every language, with full diplomatic stamps. "Stand down armaments. Reverse course. Acknowledge. This is your final notice under the Terror Threshold Clause." The Vakari flagship cut its broadcast mid-syllable. Not because it understood the clause. The Vakari did not believe in clauses. It cut the broadcast because the Dominion did not negotiate. The ghost carriers opened their eyes. There was no visible cue. The sky did not change. The stars did not flicker. The Dominion's sensor officers, trained on Vakari doctrine down to their fingernails, stared at their readouts and saw nothing remarkable. Only background. Only quiet. Only the soft gravitational background noise of a solar system that had been politely emptying itself for the past 4 hours, the way a forest floor goes quiet before a hawk folds its wings. Then a single rail platform fired. It did not miss. The first Vakari cruiser vanished in a column of light so clean it looked like a clerical error. A row of cells struck through with red ink. The second cruiser, 4 kilometers off the first, took the edge of the discharge and came apart in a slow chrysanthemum of debris. The third cruiser attempted to raise shields. The third cruiser's shields were rated for subcapital engagements. They were not rated for what the doctrine called, with characteristic human understatement, the orbital lance Mark 7 bore saturation mode. The lance did not strike the shields. It passed through them, and through the keel behind them, and through the drive housing, and into the cold ice of a moon whose name no one present would remember by morning. The Vakari Armada, 312 warships strong, executed its emergency maneuver. The maneuver was textbook. The textbook was wrong. Their doctrine assumed that any first strike from a lesser species would be a missile cloud, that any defense would scramble fighters, that any second strike would be a counterpulse. They had no entry in any of their battle manuals for a beam that came from below the ecliptic, beyond the thermal horizon, fired by a ship they could not see, operated by a crew they could not detect, on a bearing they had never plotted. Admiral Okonkwo Voss, watching from the 9th Carrier's flag bridge, did not smile. She had not smiled when the planet died. She did not smile when the lance fired. She had been trained, in the doctrine's deepest rooms, to consider the firing of the lance not as triumph, but as a failure of deterrence. She gave the next order with the same tone she might use to ask for a coffee. Floodlight them. All bands, civilian channels. Make sure the Council sees. The Dominion's astronomers, attempting to track the lance to its source, finally registered the ghost carriers. They saw 7 signatures where there had been none. They saw 3 more around the back of the system's largest moon. They saw, at the edge of their detection radius, 4 more in a graveyard orbit they had previously dismissed as junk. And then, because they had been trained to add up what they saw, they did the math. They arrived at a fleet mass that exceeded the public registry of the Terran Navy by a factor of 9. They concluded, with the kind of sick clarity that ends careers, that the human registry they had been reading for 90 years was a fiction, that the ships it listed were decoys, that the patrols they had intercepted were costume pieces, that humanity had, in front of the entire Council, performed its own military obsolescence as a long-running theater, and that the Dominion had bought a ticket. Ambassadorial channels exploded. Legate Sarath Vane, still on the rostrum of the Council, received his admiral's panic ping 3 minutes after the first lance strike. The legate did not blanch in the Vakari manner. He performed the equivalent, a slow rotation of his luminous hands inward. He asked his attaché, in a basic thickened by a translator that had begun to lag under stress, how many ships had been lost. The attaché answered, 47, and a flagship. They are firing from beneath us. They have been there for years. We cannot see them clearly. The legate asked for clarification. The attaché did not provide any. On the Council floor, the Sion Combine's senior envoy stood and asked, in the careful basic used by species who do not wish to be quoted later, for confirmation of the lance signature. The Terran envoy, the same slim woman in the dark uniform, nodded once and handed him a single sheet of paper. The paper contained, in a single column, the names of the first 6 Vakari ships destroyed. Beside each name, in handwriting from a human clerk who had died on Meridian 7, was a small cross. The chamber was very quiet. The Vakari legate tried to retrieve the moment. He tried the older Vakari gambit, the one that had worked 11 times in his career. Declare the engagement a local police action. Demand a ceasefire. Blame the humans for escalating. He filed the request through the proper diplomatic channel. The channel closed on him. The cracked mirror doctrine had, years earlier, quietly negotiated that any first strike against a civilian target automatically suspended the Chamber's automatic ratification protocols. There had been no objection at the time. The Vakari had laughed. The Sion Combine had abstained. 16 blocks had voted present. The vote tally, archived in the Chamber's basement, was now the only thing keeping Legate Vane from completing his sentence. The lance continued to fire. For 4 hours and 7 minutes, the orbital lance and its 3 sister platforms swept the Vakari Armada from beneath, behind, and beside. Human fighters, painted in colors so visible they bordered on contemptuous, took position above the wreckage to ensure that no Vakari hull escaped. The Dominion's attempt at retreat was allowed to begin, and then, with a patience that the doctrine called the courtesy of a grave, was gently closed at the choke point past the system's outermost gas giant. By the time the Vakari admiral surrendered, 193 of the 312 warships had been destroyed. The rest had been captured intact, with crews still in their bunks, because the Doctrine's planners had decided, years earlier, that capturing a Dominion crew would do more to break the Vakari narrative than destroying them would. Legate Sarath Vane was removed from the rostrum by his own guards. He was not arrested. He was escorted, with the same formal courtesy the Vakari reserve for liquidating their own senior staff, to a Vakari diplomatic vessel, which immediately disengaged from the chamber's moorings and burned hard for home. He did not speak to the press. He did not speak to the council. He did not speak to his own attaché. He watched, on a private screen, footage of the Lance at work, until the footage looped, and then he watched it loop again. The council's emergency session resumed at the 48-hour mark. The chamber was 3/4 full. The Sion Combine's envoy opened the session by formally reclassifying human strategic standing from regional observance to first-tier sovereign power. The motion was seconded, in a single unbroken chorus, by delegates whose votes had never, in any prior session, been anything but procedural. The motion passed with no abstentions and no negatives. The dossier on Earth was withdrawn from the Chamber's public archive, sealed, and replaced with a single page. The page contained, in formal Council Basic, the date of the reclassification, the list of signatories, and, beneath them, a phrase that the Doctrine had spent 70 years hoping the Council would one day be forced to write. Let it be entered in the permanent record that the sovereignty of Earth is co-equal in this chamber, and that its instruments of defense are lawful, declared, and complete. Admiral Okonkwo Voss did not attend the session. She submitted her report from the 9th Carrier's flag bridge and then, in keeping with the Doctrine's most private rules, signed her own name to the order that authorized the Lance and forwarded it, in a sealed envelope, to the chamber beneath the Canadian shield, where a warden neither praised her nor condemned her. The envelope was stored. The warden's keys were resealed. The lights in the old room were turned down, one by one, until only one remained, and it burned through the rest of the night. On Earth, the morning commute continued. The children rode the same buses. The nurses kept the same shifts. The newspapers ran the same weather on their front pages. Inside the chamber above the basalt, the president's chair was empty again, because there was nothing left to prove in public. And the Doctrine, in its deepest teaching, forbids its servants from taking a victory bow. Books would be written, later, about the Lance and the day it fired. Most of them would miss the point. The point was not the Lance. The point was that no one had to fire it. The Doctrine is called, in the quiet language of the chamber beneath the basalt, the day the warning was not a request. The galaxy remembered, and the humans, having said so, did not say it again.